Yes, what came out of this, the group that came out of this was a very libertine, very liberal type of thinking that penetrated our universities with some very libertine thoughts, and basically a liberation of sexuality and so forth was something that really permeated our universities.
But they said only to do that to pacify the public, so they're busy playing and partying.
Yes.
We have documents in the 60s in the U.S. saying we're going to have a drug culture from 61, and then they drove around with the government buses with the LSD. And
yes, what feels good, do it. Ken Kesey had a bus, and he was driving it all over. It was painted with flowers and everything on it, and he had LSD being distributed from that bus all over America. Drop acid, drop out. That was Timothy Leary's.
Turned out it was FBI.
Yeah, but that was a very similar type of thinking. Do your own thing, take a little acid,
by the way,
go on a trip,
in
right?
the 50s, the owners of Time Life Books, they were all having LSD parties.
Yes.
So the point is, you think you're rebelling against them using this stuff. The point is, they created it all, they run it all. George Butler.
Yes, they did.
Stay there. We'll be right back with the fourth hour. This is the maiden voyage. I hope you'll be with us for the fourth hour here on the Genesis Network. We'll be back in just 70 seconds with George Butler. And then we have some of the folks involved with Reed Hamad to try to find out if he was murdered coming on. George Butler, though, we were getting into just one of their mind control programs and what they really believe going back almost 100 years ago. Please continue, George.
Well, we were talking about the Frankfurt School there and this the authoritarian personality type, but it is a mind wash system that conveys into us certain ideas, and then those ideas are manipulated and changed and reformed and massaged within our minds. We take up this collection of ideas, which I call streams of light, and that forms our worldview. Having a worldview is a way to control us. And so we're actually become obsessed with extreme worldviews in some cases, and then we fight each other from the left and the right.
Which is, again, a control paradigm.
Yes, exactly. So it's hard to see because we're caught up in the field, in the system of thought that we cannot see. So it's hard for us to see what we're being addicted to and the ideas that we become compulsively addicted to.
It's hard to conceptualize it because it's not visual.
Yes, and it's hard. The only way you can try to do it is try to stand outside your mind and look back at your thoughts as they're flowing through your mind on a real-time basis.
You got to get outside the box and analyze it.
Yes, and objectively, and that's hard to do. So another self, and I always call it the real self, has to try to nurture itself back to health. It's been wounded from childhood.
That's an interesting way you describe it. I instinctively had this thought when I was 3 years old. I'm on the back porch playing. It's a sunny day. The sprinklers spraying. It's like a rainbow. It's beautiful. And I had this understanding that the world was not me, that I was on an island. No man is an island. And that I had imaginary games and imaginary friends and played make-believe. And I realized that make-believe wasn't real at that time and that there was a whole world outside of me and that I was a tiny island. I think most people don't consciously think about death because they seem to see the stream of human society, civilization, and almost think like that is theirs. No, that is the species. And just to extrapolate these ideas that I have, realizing that literally the world is what is outside of me, not what is in me. It is the opposite of what the New Agers teach and everybody else. And so then you are truly alive when you do realize that there's the rest of the world and that you are interconnected to it. But most adults I see all have their own little costumes, whatever clique they're part of, whatever group they're part of, and they all play to that. And they're all in little imaginary worlds about what position they're in. That's why we're into uniforms, signets, class, all of these things. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a study that came out of the Stanford Research Institute in the 70s, early 70s, and it was entitled Changing Images of Man. They went back over 250,000 years to the present and started doing an assessment of the images of man during those eras. And what they're trying to do in today's world is they're trying to take us back to a very subjective view, just exactly what you said a few moments ago. And in that subjective view, they can control that through the outside media. But you will give up an objective view of the outside world and take on these inner notions, but without proof.
And that's why they have these games that hundreds of millions play, where it's imaginary worlds.
It's virtual, yes. It's like a virtual prison that we're building for ourselves.
It's an insertion into the matrix.
Exactly, Alan.
George, stay there. We're going to be right back with George Butler, continue discussing this, break down a lot of it, and then we're going to interview a gentleman who knows the Palestinian man who we believe was murdered right here in Austin, Texas, and thrown in the river. But part of their brainwashing, they tell us it's a lake. He was thrown in the Colorado River, now known as Lady Bird Imperium. We'll be right.
He's the T-Rex of political talk. Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network.
Eric, Sam, Bill, Chris. I'll take those 4 calls. That's all we have time for before our next guest joins us, dealing with what we believe to be the murder of Mr. Hamidi. Before we get back into the psychological warfare operations, we're going to have you back in a lot, George. I like your info and your perspective. You'll be guest host in the next month or so if you'll do it. But you've been saying a lot about this gentleman who the evidence shows was killed. I mean, the APD immediately puts out this propaganda that he killed himself. Oh, he was loosely bound. This is just kind of like when they killed Gary Webb, shot him twice in the head. Or Fahmy Malik with Arkansas. Your comments on it?
Yeah, it says here, this is the actual quotation out there. When the body was removed from the lake, tape was found around the eyes, and the hands and legs were loosely bound. The bindings of his hands and legs and placement of the tape were consistent with Hamad having done this to himself. So they were floating the idea on the 16th, Wednesday on the 16th at 2 p.m. of suicide. And there's no way that you can get suicide out of this statement in any way.
Yeah, they say it right there in the police statement. There's just no end to these people. And it's the same M.O. And I read the paper Friday on air, and it said that his family said he had been upset about the FBI coming and grabbing all the school books he mailed to Palestine and spying on him and detaining him. And then they spun that to mean, oh, he did commit suicide. It was the same thing with Gary Webb. You know, he had seen people in his house climbing out the back window. Then he moved. He'd said he was getting threatened. We had his friends on that said that. And then they shot him and blew his jaw off, shot him in the back of the head, the guy that exposed the CIA drug dealing, Pulitzer Prize winner. He had a new book coming out proving everything he'd said, vindicating him. And they had a hit out on him and went and killed him like so many others. And the police said, oh, I'll never forget, it's quite normal to shoot yourself twice in the head, George.
Yeah, some of the language in this communique from the APD said something like this. Information was provided to the missing persons unit by persons close to Hamad. This is what suspects, persons close to Hamad. Who are they? Tell us who they are, okay? That he had been experiencing suicidal thoughts. Then later on in the next paragraph, they talk about this loosely bound and float this thing about.
But then 2 days later, when the statesman talked to the family, they just said, no, he'd been upset. We need to talk to the family.
Yes, this was.
Also, they will threaten families and get the family to go along. Go ahead.
Yeah, these are very.
It's like Bobby Kennedy's son won't talk about his dad's murder, even though it's now admitted.
Yeah, they floated this just to get the idea out to the public that he committed suicide. There's no evidence there that existed. That he did.
Now, you talked to teachers that knew him.
Yes. A friend of mine came and sat down with me soon after this, on about Thursday sometime, and I think it was after they had disclosed to the teachers that Hamad had died. And the kids were all upset at the school, Clint Small School, middle school, and also the teachers were mad as hell because this man was very well loved by many of the teachers in the Austin Independent School District. They knew him and had worked with him for several years, and they admired this man.
By the way, the special guest we've got, are we calling him from our end or the network end? Has that been fleshed out? We better find out. That guest is on in about 15 minutes, so let's find out if we're going to call from here in Austin or the network is going to call. All right, let's shift gears back into what you were covering, then we'll recap this and have the guest on in about 20 minutes.
Okay, we're picking up on the overall scheme of things is a system, and they use systems of thought that they impregnate us with, and then those things are manipulated from media and upsetting very things like this GM food and the avian flu epidemics. They continue to keep us upset, and in that upsetness, then they can change our views, and we begin to reach different conclusions and different ideas and different worldviews, and that's how they're manipulating and forming us into something that they want that is way from our real self. It's a false self that's actually being fed by these false, and they're not totally false. There is truth on some of these ideas.
I call it a spell. They're mesmerizing guys with a false map made for the mind, where it's like play along, and then I mean that's what all the terror drills and martial law drills and randomly pulling you over because there's terrorists. I mean, it's all about the illusion, and the drills are all about feeding into the hysteria.
Some of the universities in England and Great Britain are dedicated to cognitive dissonance and cognitive psychology, I should say. And on the West Coast later on, after Lewin had come in and started establishing his work and his career, the West Coast began to be a cauldron of exactly what you're saying, a subjectivism, an occultism. Aldous Huxley comes over and starts building ISIS cults on the West Coast. And it's all of these things to take us away from being able to discern and establish truth.
And they're all cold-blooded rationalists, but they destroy the old religious orders and bring in new ones to control us.
Yes, they believe in nothing but themselves as being Olympian gods, you could say. They describe themselves as Olympians among some of the closer circles, the upper circle.